Escape from Tarkov 1.0 is the result of one of the longest and most turbulent development processes in the modern FPS scene. A true epic for those who followed it from the closed alpha in 2016 to the highly anticipated release of the final version, set for November 2025. The game spent years in that typical eternal beta that only hardcore multiplayer gamers know well. Promises, constant wipes, rampant experimentation, and an emotional roller coaster of bugs, improvements, and revised features. From the beginning, you could feel that Battlestate Games wanted to create something outside the norm, but the road was far from smooth. The Russian studio Battlestate Games, formed by veterans of the Contract Wars mod, dove headfirst into the proposal of an ultra-realistic FPS focused on survival, authentic ballistics, and high-risk loot. Since the first closed tests in Unity, the obsession with realism was already hitting hard. Detailed reloads, localized damage, jamming weapons, a health system with fractures and bleeding, all to make each raid feel like an extreme military operation. The result was a dedicated but also demanding and loud community, always keeping an eye on the roadmap and the repeated delays. The early access phase, which dragged on for almost 8 years, was marked as much by technical evolutions as by controversies. There were times when playing Tarkov was practically an act of faith, with unpredictable wipes resetting all progress, a dynamic that irritated newcomers, but also solidified its own subculture of digital survivors. The dialogue between devs and the community was intense, not always peaceful, but essential for refining the experience that defines the game today. In the final stretch to 1.0, Battlestate opted for a fractional release strategy. Monthly patches between May and August 2025 brought essential optimizations, interface improvements, revisited maps, and a monstrous refinement in audio and artificial intelligence, all heavily guided by feedback from the official forum and social media. Seeing a developer truly shape the product in the heat of an engaged crowd is rare, and perhaps explains how Tarkov managed to survive the hype and the criticism for so long. The announcement that Tarkov went gold shortly before launch was a watershed moment, not just for its symbolism, but as a sign that the endless cycle of testing was really coming to an end. Expectations were carefully managed, with less flashy marketing and more focus on in-person events and low-key presentations. The detail that draws the most attention is the inclusion of new narrative content and, finally, the long-awaited definitive escape system, which should transform the game's objective for many people who are used to just looting and extracting. Another personal point is Battlestate's relationship with the Steam release. For many, seeing Tarkov migrate from its own launcher to the world's largest game store is a bittersweet victory. The studio, after years of an almost underground stance, finally decided to open up to a larger audience, even if it involves debates and dissatisfaction from those who had already bought the game in the past. It's a transition that, honestly, seems necessary for the title's future. Escape from Tarkov 1.0 features gameplay that is a rigorous blend of tactical combat simulation, hardcore survival, and RPG with a steep learning curve full of nuances that demand patience and dedication. Entering a raid in Tarkov is an immediate invitation to tension and detailed planning, where every step, every sound, can be the difference between leaving the map alive or losing everything. The feeling of constant risk permeates the game experience and makes defeats feel like heavy blows, but also intense achievements when one emerges victorious. The realistic focus on weapon handling and combat makes Tarkov distance itself from traditional shooters. The ballistic system, which takes into account projectile penetration, ammunition types, and localized body damage, creates confrontations that are deconstructed at their core, where a precise shot is a matter of strategy and positioning, not just quick aim. The detailed customization and modification of weapons in the field, as well as the choice of specific equipment, make the player responsible for their own survival, turning each loadout into a calculated bet. Movement and positioning are another highlight of the game. Tarkov is not about running and gunning. The refined control of speed, posture, standing, crouching, prone, and the option to tiptoe are indispensable tools for those who want to succeed. This dynamic creates slow and careful sequences, almost like tactical chess, where stealth and environmental control are vital for survival and mission success. The in-game economy is another important pillar of the gameplay, which isn't just limited to action and raids. Between matches, the player has a hideout to upgrade, where they can craft items, improve equipment, and heal. This strategic management of inventory and resources adds a deep layer of planning that flourishes in the need to always play cautiously, so as not to lose the internal and external investment, items acquired on the market. Another central point is the distinction between playing as a PMC, main character with progression, and a scav, free character with random equipment. This mechanic gifts the game with lower risk in certain incursions, allowing for more casual or preparatory experiences, in addition to adding variety to the gameplay. However, the heart of Tarkov is in PMC mode, where the risk of losing everything makes the experiences intense and exciting. Calculated plays are rewarded, and failures are costly. Tarkov 1.0 also reinforces the social and competitive side of the game with the constant presence of other live players on the map, creating unpredictable and tense encounters. Every door can hide an enemy, every corner an ambush. The extremely detailed sound environment, from footsteps to gunshots and voices, potentiates this tension, immersing the player in a controlled chaos that demands maximum attention. The experience is not made for everyone, and that is part of the game's charm. Escape from Tarkov demands a mindset of constant learning from the player, patience for heavy mistakes, and the will to reinvent oneself after each brutal defeat. For those who like brutal challenges and gameplay that mixes the best of tactical simulation with the suspense of survival, Tarkov 1.0 offers an immersive and rewarding journey, although frustrating for the impatient. It's one of those rare games where you feel like you're always progressing, even when you lose everything. Because in Tarkov, the experience is worth more than the loot. This constant intensity combined with the depth of the combat, economy, and survival systems makes Tarkov's gameplay a unique case in the FPS scene. A game made for those who want to be tested in every sense of the word. This is my impression after playing intensely and feeling the game not just as a test of reflexes, but as an experience of constant personal evolution in the midst of chaos. The game takes place in the fictional Norvinsk Special Economic Zone, surrounding the city of Tarkov in northwestern Russia, between the years 2015 and 2026. The game's backdrop is a post-social and economic collapse scenario, marked by political scandals and the fall of large corporations, which resulted in a city practically in ruins and taken over by aggressive factions. This chaotic context creates the perfect environment for the constant war between the private military factions, PMCs, USEC and Bear, in addition to the locals called scavs, a resilient people fighting to survive or simply to loot. The game's narrative, although not explicitly linear, is deeply immersive and requires attention to be understood. The lore begins to be revealed through the environment itself, its maps, objects, and missions, and comes to life in encounters with characters, dialogues, and scattered documents. The player takes on the role of a PMC operator trapped in this conflict, where the goal is to survive and escape the devastated region. The differential is that the narrative is intrinsically connected to the gameplay, causing every raid and decision to impact the player's perception of what is really happening in Tarkov. Among the factions, USEC represents military forces sponsored by Western interests hired to cover up the illegal activities of Terra Group, a shadowy corporation that has its own dark interests in Tarkov. On the other hand, Bear is a force created by the Russian government to investigate these illegal operations and protect its interests. This duality creates a climate of political tension and espionage that serves as a backdrop for the intense armed conflict between the two groups. Besides the human factions, the chaotic city is populated by scavs who are wilder locals, including subgroups like scav raiders and cultists, each with their own threat levels and behavior. These enemies reinforce the picture of a world where law and order have completely broken down, and the player needs to understand the dynamics of this hostile environment to survive. The complexity of the characters and their interactions, combined with the players themselves, yields an unpredictable and tense scenario in every match. The plot also explores the presence of Terra Group, responsible for a series of secret experiments in underground laboratories, which likely fuel catastrophic events in Tarkov, including the use of chemical weapons and private armies. Although the story has many obscure points, advanced missions and quests gradually unravel these dark mysteries, bringing conspiracies and the devastating impact of corporate greed on the local population's life to light. Version 1.0 delves deeper into explaining, at least partially, why the player is trapped in Tarkov and what the real meaning of escaping is. The journey to get out of this urban hell involves unstable alliances, betrayals, rescues, and the search for information that can change the balance of the conflict, all while the world around collapses. This narrative construction sets the player in a scenario where every combat or mission has emotional weight and relevance for survival in the broader context. Overall, what struck me most about the story of escape from Tarkov 1.0 is precisely this discrete depth, which isn't obvious in cutscenes, but in which you get involved by uncovering each map, each character, and each faction. The story isn't just a backdrop. It's fuel for the feeling of being in the middle of a real, complex conflict full of political and human nuances. It's a game that rewards those who have the patience to observe, read, interact, and piece together Tarkov's dystopian puzzle, making the experience much richer than any mere shoot and loot. Escape from Tarkov 1.0 features graphics that, for me, are one of the most impressive and at the same time, most challenging parts of the game experience. The visual quality is realistic and detailed, with well-crafted textures and environments that manage to give a palpable feeling of urban warfare and abandonment. The game doesn't try to be a next-gen technological showcase, but rather, it seeks a raw realism, which for me makes all the difference in creating that heavy, intense immersion the gameplay demands. The maps are rich in environmental details, with a great diversity of objects, vegetation, destroyed buildings, and ruins, which provide unique and varied scenarios. The attention to detail in the map design is noticeable, with environments that really seem to have a story behind them, as if every corner had something to tell. This makes exploration much more interesting and contributes to the game's dark and tense atmosphere. However, although the visuals are impressive, the game also suffers from serious graphical optimization problems. Even on powerful computers, many players face significant performance drops on certain maps, like Streets, where the frame rate can plummet drastically, making the experience frustrating. This, for me, is a point that urgently needs improvement, because the detailed visuals end up costing dearly in performance, which is not ideal for a competitive game that requires high responsiveness. Lighting and shadows are another strength of the game, with systems that simulate realistic atmospheric effects and subtle reflections that contribute to the tense mood. The use of shading and natural light at different times of the day enhances the realism, although these effects can also impact performance. To maximize performance, many players end up reducing the quality of shadows and certain effects, which, in my opinion, diminishes the visual impact but is a necessary sacrifice to run the game more smoothly. Another aspect worth highlighting is the modeling of weapons and equipment, which feature high-quality, almost photographic textures and animations. The visual customization of weapons is even richer in this 1.0 version, a point that always caught my favorable attention in Tarkov, as it elevates the game to a level where aesthetic care isn't just in the environment, but also in the character's equipment, reinforcing the realism and deep customization. Despite the praise, the enormous graphical complexity of Escape from Tarkov 1.0 makes it heavy for most machines, particularly because the game is heavily CPU-bound, not just demanding a powerful GPU. This means that even a top-of-the-line setup can suffer from FPS drops if the processor can't keep up with the countless physics, ballistics, and artificial intelligence simulations happening simultaneously. For me, this creates a dilemma. Beautiful graphics, but hardware that is too demanding for everyone to fully enjoy. I consider Tarkov 1.0's graphics one of the high points of the game for its immersion and visual fidelity, but also a source of frustration and technical challenges. It's a trade-off between beauty and performance that doesn't always work for everyone. However, personally, I think this raw visual with its details and atmosphere is essential for what Tarkov wants to be, a tense and realistic experience. The game won me over precisely because of this visual authenticity, even knowing that it can be a hassle to run smoothly on many machines. The performance of Escape from Tarkov 1.0 is one of the most controversial and challenging points for every player, and my experience reflects exactly this complexity. The game delivers a visually rich and detailed environment, but this comes with an extremely high technical demand, especially regarding code optimization and intensive CPU use. I felt firsthand how performance varies greatly from map to map, which can be frustrating for those seeking fluid and constant gameplay. On smaller, more enclosed maps like Factory, performance can be acceptable, with relatively stable FPS above 80 to 100 on medium to good machines. However, when exploring larger and more open maps, like Customs or especially Streets, the FPS plummets drastically, even reaching levels below 50 frames per second, which compromises gameplay and makes certain actions almost inaccessible, like aiming and reacting quickly. This fluctuation between maps made me think that the game still lacks robust optimization that covers all scenarios equally. Another factor that weighs heavily is how CPU-dependent Tarkov is. Even with high-end GPUs, I noticed that processors with fewer cores or threads can struggle to maintain decent fluidity. This is because, in addition to graphics, the game runs heavy physics, artificial intelligence, and network simulations, which demand raw power from the processor. Therefore, to run Tarkov 1.0 with good performance, it's not enough to just have a latest generation video card. The entire PC setup needs to be balanced to handle this load. The development team has been investing in optimizations and updates focused on improving performance, releasing patches that adjust the graphics and how the game handles system resources. Even so, many players still report crashes, stuttering, and abrupt FPS drops in specific game situations, which gives the feeling that Tarkov reached version 1.0 with this technical debt still pending. In my opinion, this is a problem that weighs heavily, because the experience can be compromised not by lack of content, but by instability. A positive point is that the game offers various graphical settings that can be adjusted according to the player's hardware, such as texture quality, shadows, and post-processing effects. Using NVIDIA's DLSS or AMD's FSR helps to improve FPS without as much visual loss, which seems like a good palliative solution to me, but it still doesn't solve the core of the problem related to the graphics engine and the background simulation load. For casual players, this issue is even more evident. Tarkov demands resilience not only in gameplay, but also in patience to deal with its technical problems. In my experience, it seems the game is not even close to ideal for all audiences, especially for those who don't have a top-tier gaming PC or a stable connection line. This creates a higher barrier to entry than other games in the genre and can drive away curious new players. The performance of Escape from Tarkov 1.0 is a double-edged sword. The game delivers a complex and detailed world, but this richness comes at a high price in terms of stability and fluidity. My opinion is that despite the constant advances and improvements, the technical optimization problem is still not fully resolved, and this directly affects the experience, especially for those who play on more modest hardware or connections. Tarkov 1.0 is a potential masterpiece, but a test of patience for many players on the technical side. Buying at launch is a decision that largely depends on each player's profile, especially if you like challenges and are willing to face a more technical and, at times, frustrating experience. In my gaming experience, Tarkov, full of bugs, performance issues, and an extremely high learning curve, is not a game for those looking for something more accessible or casual. If you like to try games that test you mentally and want to be ahead of the hype, it might be worth diving in right at the beginning, knowing the difficulties. On the other hand, waiting a bit longer can make all the difference. The game still has a series of technical problems and bugs that the development team is trying to solve, but which, in my opinion, still leave the experience short of ideal. By waiting for a few updates, you have the chance to enjoy a more stable version, with performance improvements, bug fixes, and possible balancing adjustments. For those who don't have top-of-the-line hardware or don't like dealing with this instability, this could be a smart move. The purchase recommendation also varies according to your objective. If your focus is to have fun with a hardcore experience of shooting, survival, and resource management, Tarkov is a unique game that rewards perseverance. But if you're the type who prefers a more fluid, aesthetic, and accessible experience, perhaps now is not the ideal time. Waiting a few months might be worth it for a more polished version, especially with the secondhand market and sales on the rise. Another important point is that, if you like to follow the game's scene, its evolution, and content updates, buying at launch makes sense. That way, you participate from the beginning, contribute with feedback, and get involved in the community. Furthermore, Tarkov offers extremely rich content, where each wipe and each wipe refresh brings new things and a constant feeling of novelty that only those who play from the beginning can fully enjoy. If your profile is that of a player who likes to delve into the lore, understand the complexity of the factions, and constantly challenge yourself, Tarkov is a rare pearl to find. The experience, even with bugs and unstable performance, is worth a lot. However, only those with willpower and patience should risk it immediately. For these people, as critical as it may be, the game is worth every penny for what it offers in authenticity and challenge. For those who don't like to wait, it is recommended to study your hardware configurations and optimizations well before buying, as performance can greatly hinder a fluid experience. If you are willing to accept the early pains, it can be an adventure that will mark you and teach you a lot about perseverance and strategy. But if you prefer a more solid experience from day one, it might be better to wait for at least some additional improvements, which will likely arrive in the coming months. In summary, it is worth buying Tarkov at launch if you are a fan of challenging games, have patience, and want to be on the front line of an ambitious project, even with its problems. But if your goal is a more polished experience, with fewer headaches and more fluidity, waiting a bit will certainly give you a more positive experience. For me, the game has real potential, but the timing of the purchase must be well evaluated according to your willingness to deal with the turbulent initial phase.